The memory verse that we have today is a familiar one. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Each of us has felt the challenge that comes with the priority of our walk with God. I mean, after all, I have studies, I have an exam tomorrow, how can I take time with God? Or, hey, I had that wash to do, how can I take time? Or the children to care for, or I got a job to do, I got to go shopping. I only have 24 hours in a day, what do you expect? And it's so easy for the things of God to be put second place because the other things are pressing. And they have to, so it's so easy for them to take priority. It's the same for pastors. I've seen that over my journey, that one of the first things you can let go is studying the Bible or Bible studies, because every Bible study is 3 hours. So how many 3 hours can you give a week? So how many do you have? And so we're taking a look at that today through the journey of the children of Israel. And all for priority in a circumstance that's pressing. Now, usually our circumstances aren't pressing from a danger point of view, but from their experience, there were points that there were pressures from the danger point of view. There were other things to do. I had two maps to put up on the screen, but unfortunately one of them didn't make it, and that's was my responsibility. But some in the back of your Bible to be able to follow, and we're going to take setting of this particular picture you have on the screen. You'll notice where the first across the Jordan River and staying at Gilgal. But in order to really appreciate the moment they're in and the important transition that they have, we need to go back in our time. And so you have a handout that's going to help, and the handout has a lot of details in it. I'm going to try to do more of an airplane view, and if you're interested, you can study it further. The first phase that I want to take a look at, that's a setup for this particular lesson today, is the phase that takes place over here on your left. Come down to Egypt, and then you drop down to Sinai, and then you come over to Kadesh Barnea. So you have the first phase involves those three locations. And it opens up in my notes with the first phase being in Egypt. And in Egypt, on the first, they were said, this is the first month. It was during the time of the plagues. This is the first month. And after the 9th plague, Joshua and Moses were told, and Aaron, I want you to plan that on the 14th day of the first month, you are to have a Passover. And you are to prepare yourself to leave. Just think, if you were living in a place for years, and you're going to leave the next day, what's your priority? Oh, I got to pack. What am I going to take? What do I need on the way? And God says, oh, by the way, this is the Passover. You're to kill a lamb, and you put the blood on the doorposts. And if you think you don't want to do that, then be prepared to lose your firstborn son. So was there a priority of spirituality over packing for the journey? Yes, there's a priority. And on the 14th day, the first month of the new Jewish calendar, they were to take the time for the Passover, the total family with the blood on the doorpost. It was a spiritual priority, even though they had to pack. And that night, the 14th night, the angel passed over, and everyone who had the blood on the doorpost they were spared the death of the firstborn son. So if they had the Passover on the 14th day of the first month, and they're going to leave the next day, what day of the month, what number day of the month did they leave? 15th day. That's right, 15th day. And we get down to chapter 19, book of Exodus. How long did it take them to go from the time they were in Egypt to Sinai? What does the second part say? Number 2 says on there, how long was it that it took them the journey from Egypt with all their stories to get to Sinai? It took them how many months? 3 months. Of course, you have several things happening in those 3 months. The crossing of the Red Sea. You had them out of water, out of food, they had to fight some armies, but they finally came. So you had Egypt's story, priority of worshiping God in a time of crisis. And then you come to Sinai. Now, when they come to Sinai, that's where God is going to make them a nation. And it was a priority. But do you think some people were anxious? Come on, we were supposed to get to the promised land. We're out here in this desert around the mountain. Come on, we want to get going. We want that promised land, that land of milk and honey. We want that. And you'll notice it's interesting from the Bible text that they, in number 3, they were there at Sinai for 1 year, less than 25 days. So almost a total of 1 year, they're there at Sinai. And the priority, instead of going to the promised land, is I want to make you a nation. I want you to have a spiritual walk with me. And so he enters into a covenant, speaks from Sinai, tells us 10 commandments in chapter 20, in chapter 21 to 24, 23, 24. He talks about judgments and statutes that they live by. And then they're to build a tabernacle, chapter 25 to 30. They're to build a tabernacle so I could be among. Come on, let's get going. We want to go to the promised land. No, you need to be a nation. I'm going to make you a nation in a covenant relationship with me. That's your priority. And he gave them moral laws. He gave them health laws. He gave them spiritual laws that they're feasting that they're supposed to keep. And he gave them government laws. He made them a nation. And they're there for just under 1 year. Now, it is interesting to note in number 4, just before that time was up, they completed the sanctuary. So from Exodus 25 to 30, they're told about all the parts of the sanctuary. Exodus 35 to 40 is the building of this sanctuary. But it's interesting, Exodus 40, verse 17, the tabernacle was erected 20 days before they left Sinai. So it wasn't very long. And they now were complete. They are entered into a covenant. They now had their tabernacle. They now made their commitment to God. And God says, now we're ready to go. We're ready to go to the promised land. So it was not even a year that since they left Sinai. It was not even completely, a little more than a year would it be by the time they got to Sinai ready to go. And they were going over to Kadesh Barnea. Unfortunately, I don't have the other map, but if you can think of it as a triangle, over here you have Egypt, down here you have Sinai, up here you have Kadesh Barnea. And this map is just beyond that. How long did it take them to get to Kadesh Barnea? That's the next point. It's interesting, Kadesh Barnea was, according to Deuteronomy 1, verse 2, was 11 days trip, just 11 days from Sinai over to Kadesh Barnea. And that's walking. That's not by train or Air Canada or a bus. That's walking. 11 days. and they would be into the promised land. Does that sound unusual? Usually we think of the children of Israel, we think 40 years. No, that wasn't God's plan. They were to be in the promised land in 11 days. That 11 days meant that it's still under, from the time they arrived in Sinai to be in the promised land is still under 1 year. So they get to Kadesh Barnea. And the bright idea is, let's send in some spies. Let's check it out, this place. We're anxious to get into the promised land. How many spies did they send out? 12 spies, right. And they were gone out into the promised land for how many days checking it out? 40 days they were checking it out. And they came back with the report. And so when you read Numbers chapter 13, after they come back, they give the report, and it was a good report. They even brought some grapes. And they were happy in that until 10 of the 12 spies turned. And they said, hey, it's not a good land. We're like grasshoppers. No way we can take them. And the people became discouraged. They lost their belief in God, even in light of all that they'd gone through. And they rebelled, and that was the turning point. And when they rebelled, they said, we can't take it. And they, choosing to lead them back into Egypt, Caleb and Joshua tried to encourage them. They're like bread for us. God has given us into their hands. Let's go in. And what were they going to do to Joshua and to Caleb that turned the tide for God? They picked up stones and were going to kill them. And when they did that, the glory of the Lord appeared, and he said, that's enough. You've gone far enough. I'm not going to take you into the promised land. You're going to go 40 years back into the wilderness. And the children that you felt were now vulnerable, they're the ones that are going to come in, and all of you that are rebelling are going to die. So they thought about that. We're going to die. We're not going to go in the wilderness. Guess what? We're able to go in. Look how many of us, with our crowd, we can overwhelm them. And Moses says, don't do it. The Lord's not with you. And they tried, and they went up, and they were slaughtered. They came back defeated. They turned into the wilderness. By the way, the time they were at Sinai goes from Exodus chapter 19 to Numbers chapter 10. And then from Numbers chapter 10 to Deuteronomy chapter 1 are the stories of things that happened to them in the wilderness. And there are stories that are there. Like there are several stories when they were at Sinai, worshiping the golden. So they turned into the wilderness for the 40 years. And in Numbers you have several stories of their rebellion, including the serpents and turning against Moses, and the rebellion of some leaders trying to take over the priesthood. All those stories are there. But that's from Numbers chapter 10. And when you finally come over to where we are today in our lesson, you have several things happening at Sinai. One of the things there, number 8, was when you read the story in our lesson today, where it says that they circumcised when they got over the Jordan with Joshua, they circumcised and they had the Passover, and you say, wow, what happened here? Because circumcision was given and was supposed to be something that was done on a regular basis. 8 days after the boy was born, there's supposed to be circumcision. So what happened? Something happened. And celebrating Passover, sure, the Bible talks a lot about that. But what I didn't realize, and I went back through the text, and it doesn't bring it out, but the fact that it's raised in Deuteronomy, in Joshua, it does bring up the question. At Barnea, did they lose the right for circumcision and the Passover? And there's a very interesting quote in Patriarchs and Prophets 4:85, which confirms that. The Bible hints to it. She confirms it. Let me just read. You can put the note. It's there in number for you. And this is now jumping ahead to Joshua and the Passover. This is getting back to Kadesh Barnea, where they lost the right for circumcision and the Passover. A short distance from Jordan, the Hebrews made their first encampment at Canaan. Here Joshua circumcised the children of Israel, and the children of Israel encamped in Gilgal and kept the Passover. The suspension of the rite of circumcision since the rebellion at Kadesh had been a constant witness to Israel that their covenant of God, of which it was a appointed symbol, had been broken. So there was no circumcision from Kadesh Barnea, the 40 years that they were in the wilderness, until it's now renewed in Joshua when they get to Gilgal. What else? The discontinuance of the Passover, the memorial of their deliverance from Egypt, had been an evidence of the Lord's displeasure at their desire to return to the land of bondage. However, the years of rejection are ended. So that's Patriarchs and Prophets 485. It is hinted at in the text, but you easily miss it. And so during that 40 years that they rebelled, they couldn't go in. They could have gone after 11 days and the 40 days of the spies. They could have gone in and taken the land. They turned back, and for 40 years they wander in the wilderness. And if you look at a map, they're here at Kadesh Barnea. They could have gone into the promised land, which would have brought them coming right up this way. Instead, they have to go into the promised land and wander in this area for 40 years, and then the time comes for them to come over. And when the time comes, they have to go around Edom. Why do they have to go around Edom? Because that's the land of Esau. Then they come around, and they come up by the area of Moab, and they can't take Moab. Why can't they take Moab? Because that is one of the daughters of one of the children of Lot. And there's one other area they can't take, and it's the Ammonites, because that's another son of Lot. So they were to bypass them and come up on this side. And they were not supposed to bother them, because God said, I've given those lands to Lot, and I've given those lands to Edom. Now they asked permission to go through Edom, and Edom said, no, I won't allow you to walk through the highway. Now, in Deuteronomy 1:3, and we're down to number 9. After 40 years, it says they've come over into the promised land, and they're at the area of Gilgal where that red line is. And let's take a look at what the text says in Deuteronomy 1, verse 3. That's the book just before Joshua. And this is very insightful. In Deuteronomy 1, verse 3, does someone have that? Yes, go ahead. Ed, she needs the mic. Heather.
Deuteronomy 1, verse 3, and this is the Revised Standard Version. And in the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses spoke to the people of Israel according to all that the Lord had given him in commandment to them.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good. Now, what a difference between verse 2 and verse 3, because verse 2 says it's 11 days' journey from Horeb to by way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. That's 11 days from Sinai to Kadesh Barnea. And the next verse is 40 years later. One verse, 40 years. And it tells them, in the 40th year, the 11th month, the first day of the month, Moses spoke to the children of Israel according to all that the Lord had commanded him the commandments to them. So the book of Deuteronomy starts 40 years later, and he's standing there 40 years later, and he's at that red spot going across. Now, just before that, before he's there, you find that the children of Israel start off in Egypt, go down to Sinai, Kadesh Barnea. They choose not to go in. They have 40 years of wilderness. They come up on the right side of the Dead Sea and the Jordan. As they come up, they're met by Amorite peoples who do not like Israel. And Sihon, the king, is the first one they meet. And he resists them, and they conquer him. Then they go north to Bashan, which is way up there on the right side of the Sea of Galilee. And Og is there, and he's a giant. I think his beard was 11 feet long. And he's a giant, and they conquer all the land under Moses. They conquer all the land on the right side of the Jordan, Dead Sea of Galilee, all that area on the right side, the east side of the Jordan. They take all of that land. So they conquer Sihon on the south, and they conquer Og on the north. And they conquer that before our Joshua is made leader. Now that's significant because evidently it's a lot of good land for cattle and sheep. And so you have 3 tribes that are interested to have their possession on that side. Anyone remember the names? Reuben, Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh. Three particular tribes that are on that side of the river. So now, the interesting thing is, because it says here in Deuteronomy 3:1, it gives you a date. It gives you a date, and that's the next section. So we finished the first section in the handout. The next section gives you a date. It says, the people passed over Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and camped at Gilgal. All right? That's when they passed over Jordan. It says they passed over Jordan on the 10th day of the what month? The very first month. But that's interesting because you compare that to what Moses said in the opening chapter of his book, Deuteronomy. And you go back under number 9. And Moses said that Moses with Israel at the entrance of the promised land on the first day of the 11th month on the 40th year. So if you compare those two, you have the people going over the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and yet they came into the promised land on the first day of the 11th month. So if it's 11th month, first day, we can say there's 30 days in that on the 11th month, and then 30 days on the 12th month, and the children of Israel went across 10 days of the first. So you have 30 days of November, you have 30 days of December, and 10 days of January 1, if you please. 30 plus 30 plus 10 is how many days? 70. What's the insight for that? To me, that's exciting. That means that they were at the entrance of the promised land with Moses. They were at that location before they went across the Jordan for 70 days. For 70 days they were there before they went over the Jordan. And that's significant because you have some very interesting stories that took place. They were to prepare their hearts to go into the promised land. They're all excited, but they let down their guard. What stories happened while they were ready there to go over before they go over the Jordan? What story do you have that's significant? You have the story of Balaam. You have the story of the Moabites, Balak, trying to seduce the children of Israel. And they invited them not to worship in their sanctuary, but come and enjoy one of our feasts. And they worshiped God, false gods, and they fell into immorality, and 24,000 of the people died because they let down their spiritual guard. And that's why it's so important to keep in mind that we must keep our spirituality in tune at every opportunity, even when it doesn't seem to be any pressure, as well as when there is pressure. So when they come to that point of ready to go across, during the time of Moses, you have them fall into one of the major sins of their journey. They've conquered the east side. They feel good about it. They already feel they're victorious going into the promised land. And it's time for them to reflect and get their relationship well with God before they go across the Jordan. And they have 70 days while they're there. And that's the time when Moses goes over the whole book of Deuteronomy. And that's the time when he instructs the people. He goes up to also Mount Pisgah, and he's given a vision of all the promised land that's going to be for the children of Israel. And then what happens to him? He dies. God says, I'm not allowing you to go in. The people really were mourning, and before they go across the Jordan, they lost their leader. But the leader is replaced by whom? Joshua. And Joshua now prepares the people spiritually. Prepare yourself, sanctify yourself. We're going across the Jordan. The priests in that, it's interesting, the priests carry the ark, they go into the Jordan, it opens up, they go across. What is the first place they set up camp when they get on the other side of the Jordan? Gilgal. Now, if you look at the map here, as soon as you come across, you have Ai and Jericho is right in that area, and they know the people are upset with them because they closed the gates in Jericho. The spies were hunted down. They were anxious to get into the promised land, but they knew it was going to be a lot of battles. But God says, wait a minute, before you take on that big responsibility, I want you to have a spiritual renewal time. Your mindset is so important before you take on the challenges of life. Is that true today? You must have your mindset in harmony with God before you take on the challenges of your life. If you have peace within, you can take the challenges without. If you don't have peace within, the challenges will break you. Now I listed in the handout 6 important things when they came to Gilgal that they accomplished there. And it's very interesting because if you notice that all the verses come from Joshua chapter 5, and it goes from verse 2 to 10, and it lists the several things that happened at Gilgal that are a spiritual renewal in the setting of all their enemies. All the enemies are in front of them. They were anxious. They wanted the promised land, but they already knew that there were giants in the land and there were significant fortifications in the land. And God says, hey, the battle's mine, not yours. But you will only be successful if you have a walk with me. And so on the 10th day of the first month, they crossed the Jordan. That's number 12. On the 10th day, and they set up a monument of God's deliverance, going through the Jordan like he had taken them through the Red Sea. Number 13, on the 14th day of the month, what did they celebrate? The Passover. And this is the first time they celebrate the Passover in 40 years. Do you think there was a lot of celebration? There's a lot of joy in their heart. They could celebrate the passing over of the angel, and they were spared. They also could think of forward the lamb, future lamb that was going to come. That would be the Redeemer, saved by the blood. So they were very, very happy to celebrate the Passover. Number 14, the day after the Passover, the 15th day, it says the people ate the produce of the land. They wce able to eat the produce around them. and they enjoyed the produce of the promised land. That brought them a lot of joy. So once they ate the produce of the promised land, what do you think stopped? The manna, right, that's the next way. So they ate the produce of the land, number 14, and then number 15, on the 16th day, so the 14th day is Passover. The next day they ate the produce of the land, and the next day they ate the manna. The manna stopped. That's very thoughtful of God. He could have stopped the manna on the 10th day they came across and said, hey, you're in the promised land, you don't need the manna. But he waited till they ate the produce of the land first, and he said, okay, you can see your needs are cared for. Now I will stop giving the manna. Now number 16 says, therefore between the 11th day, when they came across on the 10th day, and the 14th day was the Passover, so between the 11th day and the 13th day, it says that the men were circumcised. And this is a significant covenant expression. It is as important as baptism today. Baptism is the entrance into the fellowship of the church. Circumcision was the entrance into the covenant relation between God and the children of Israel. And so for them to be able to be told, now I want you to circumcise, it's removing that piggy on the back that they had, pig on the back. They now were in a covenant relationship. They had the Passover. They could think about God's deliverance. And it was a joyful time. The Passover, circumcision, the food from the land. It was a joyful time. And then it says in number 17, all the men who rebelled at Kadesh Barnea had died in the wilderness. And that's a very sad picture, because all of those people could have easily gone into the promised land at Kadesh Barnea if they had been willing to do so. But they rebelled. But the children that they feared would be killed, they're the ones that go in. So the Bible says very clearly, all the men of war died who refused to go in to the promised land. They all died in the wilderness. So this all happened at Kadesh Barnea when they were anxious to take the promised land, yet fearful for all their enemies. God says, you need time with me. And whatever your priorities is on every day or school obligations. I can remember one quick story. When I was in graduate school, we determined that we'd still go to prayer meeting each Wednesday night. And I can remember this one time at Andrews, we went over to prayer meeting, and this guy came in. He was a stranger to us. I didn't know who he was, didn't recognize him as a leader, and yet he came in, had the presence of someone who was going to introduce him, and he sat there for a while, and then they introduced him as Mr. Kulikov, the first Russian Adventist to come to the United States under the Soviet Union time. And they permitted him to come and visit, and he got up and told about the stories of what it was like to live in Soviet Union back in the 70s. That's ancient. And told about time under blankets they typed or wrote Bible and Spirit of Prophecy books, and told about the people and their love for the Lord, but also the persecution. What a treat. But the thought is, if you go to what you may even think is just a normal service, be ready for a gem, a special visitor, a special thing happens, special testimony, a special impression you receive from the Holy Spirit. Take the initiative. It may be, I'm going to still have my devotion, I'm still going to have my prayer time, even though I have a test. It's better to take a B+ with God than an A+ without God. It's better to have an older car and have your kids in Christian education than a new car and expose them to some of the things that they would have. But it's a personal decision. Is my priority God, my knowledge of God? And I like what Paul says in Philippians. He says, I count all things but loss, that I may gain a knowledge of Christ. How important? What are you willing to invest to gain a knowledge of Christ? Okay, turn the page. As soon as Gilgal, they had the Passover, they had the circumcision, they had the produce of the land, they had the manna stop. Now they are ready spiritually to take on what's coming. And the first city that's right before them is Jericho. So right across the Jordan, when they came across the Jordan, is Jericho and Ai, two cities. And so when you turn back of your sheet, you find that Joshua sets his mind to take these cities. But as he's out reflecting on this, who appears to him? Jesus appears to him. He is the captain of the Lord's host. And I've come to give you the strategy on what you should do to take the Jericho. Now, I'm sure Joshua said, how are we going to do it? Look at those walls. How are we ever going to take those cities fortified? God says, calm down, calm down. I'm in charge here. I led you to this place. You've put me first. And just like in the time of Balaam says, I cannot curse Israel because I do not find rebellious sins in their midst. Jesus said, you're okay. You do this. You go around Jericho once a day, and the seventh day, go around it 7 times, and the city's yours. Did they do that? The city's theirs. And they said, we feel great. We can take the rest of the world on. So just send a few guys up to Ai. But we won't have to ask God. We don't need his leading. They didn't fall back on worshiping God. And Ai became a very, very sad place. They came back defeated. And God says there's sin in the camp. I can't bless you. So that's the story of Achan. Now, when they had taken those 2 cities, all the rest of this country is filled all down through into Philistia, all the way up to Galilee. They are filled with people that are angry. They're upset because Israel's coming in, and they know they're supposed to take the country, and they come across the Jordan, and they're fearful, and they're ready to fight. And God says, hey, it's time to worship. Even though there's a war crisis here, it's time for you to worship. I don't want you to take any more land until you worship me. And so what happens after taking of Ai and Jericho, Joshua says, Moses told us that we're to go up to 2 mountains. Anyone know what mountains I'm thinking about? Yes, Gerizim and Ebal. And they were right up in that area. I see Ebal on there, and I see Gerizim. Ebal's first, and Gerizim's below it. Moses said Mount Gerizim is the mountain of blessings. Mount Ebal is the mountains of curses. And I didn't spot it. I'm trying to think where it is, where half the tribes of Israel are on Gerizim, half the tribes on Ebal. They're at the foot of these mountains. They're about 3,000 feet high. And they're supposed to talk back to each other as a choir. At Gerizim, they speak the promises. And if you go to the last, from chapters like 27, 28 to 31 of Deuteronomy, it gives the blessings and the curses. So Gerizim, they say, blessed are those that serve the Lord. They'll prosper in their farmlands. And then over here, they repeat the curses. But curses everyone who serves other gods. And then they come back, blessings and curses. But in Joshua's book, it says that they mention Gerizim, but all the activities at Ebal. So Gerizim's in the lower, then Ebal's above it. And in Ebal, they built an altar where they were to give burnt offerings and peace offerings. And they had covered some rocks, and they put what on it? Plaster on it. Thanks, Ed. And there they wrote the 10 Commandments on there and the statutes. And people were able to see those. And then it says Joshua repeated the blessings and the curses. The fact that there was an altar there was a blessing because they knew at the altar it meant it's from our offerings on the altar that we can find forgiveness. So it's interesting that after they had taken Jericho and Ai, they went into worship. Worship is a priority, even though all those other enemies were there. What did God do to secure them from being attacked when they went to worship? What did God do? Yes, He put the fear of God in their hearts, and they were behind their fortifications, fearful to go out and take them on, because they knew what happened to Sihon and Og, and now they knew what happened to Jericho and Ai, and so they, hey, we better just back away here and let them attack us. That's our best defense. And so the fear of Israel was upon the people, and so they could go and worship. So God honors those that put Him first. God blesses and enriches and satisfies those that put Him first. So after they go up to Gerizim and Ebal, they come back to Gilgal. Then you have the story of the Gibeonites who came and made it as though they were far away. But that opened up further exploits. So after Ai and that, and after worshiping, they came over to the Gibeonites, and they fought with all those nations that went against Gibeah. They fought, and here you see, they come south, and they capture all the south, and after that, they go up and capture all the north, and therefore the whole land is basically broken and conquered for Israel. But then they still remember the time of worship. And what did they do? There's a place called Shiloh. Shiloh is right there, just below that red mark. What did they do at Shiloh that was important in their walk with God at that time? They set up the tabernacle. They put the place of worship center in their lives. Even though they had conquered the land, there were still pockets of resistance, and they were challenged, each tribe to drive out the resistant areas. They came to Shiloh, and they divided the land, and that land became the nation of Israel. How many tribes were on the east side of the Jordan? 2.5, which meant how many tribes were on the west side? How good is your math? How many? 9.5. Is that right? Okay, 10.5. No, if it's 12, 2 makes 10, half is 9. Okay, I get a C- in my math today. So they're now established, and you have the end of the book of Joshua, and it says in the last phrase there, Joshua completes his mission and calls the people to renewal their covenant with God. And so the end of Joshua, the land is conquered, and Joshua asks the people to enter into a covenant with God. And the last verse, it says, Joshua and all the leaders who outlived Joshua served the Lord. Isn't that beautiful? And then, of course, you go into the people. They don't finish their work. You go into the book of Judges, and it's up and down all through the book of Judges as God endeavors to bless His people, honor His people, and if they honor Him, He honors them. And it's the same with us. If we honor God in our time of struggle, God, or not even our time of good time, if we put Him first, seek ye first, then all the other things fall into place. May the Lord be with us as we gain principles from this story to help us in our walk with Him. Amen.